The blood from Cassandra Adams' split lip dripped onto the rough floorboards of their modest Texas homestead as her husband Thomas towered above her, his fists clenched and face contorted with rage. The year was 1877, and Trinity, Texas was supposed to be their fresh start, not the place where her dreams would shatter like the mirror Thomas had broken in his fury. "You couldn't even do this one thing right," Thomas snarled, his boot connecting with the side of the trunk where she'd carefully stored the tiny garments she'd sewn for their baby. "A real wife would have given me a son." Cassandra curled into herself, one arm protectively wrapped around her still tender abdomen, the other shielding her face. The miscarriage had happened 3 days ago, the doctor saying something about her body not being strong enough after last winter's fever. Thomas had been in Fort Worth on business then. He'd returned today to find her no longer with child. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she knew no amount of apologies would soothe his temper. "Please, Thomas, I tried." He grabbed her by the arm, yanking her to her feet. "My mother gave my father 6 healthy children. Your own mother had 4. What kind of woman are you that you can't even carry one to term?" The slap that followed sent her reeling back against the wall. Her vision blurred, but not enough to miss him reaching for his belt. Cassandra knew what came next. It had happened before, though never this bad, never with this much hatred burning in his eyes. "Thomas, please," she begged. He was deaf to her pleas. The first lash of the belt buckle caught her across the shoulder and Cassandra screamed. "That's enough." The voice was deep, unfamiliar, and came from the doorway of their cabin. Both Cassandra and Thomas froze, turning toward the intruder. A tall man filled the doorframe, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting Texas sun. The stranger wore dusty trail clothes and a worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes. His right hand rested casually near the holster at his hip. "This is between a man and his wife," Thomas spat. "Get off my property." The stranger didn't move. "No man worthy of the name beats a woman, especially not one grieving a child." "Levi Weston," the man said simply, addressing Cassandra, not Thomas. "I'm the new foreman at the Crescent Ranch next property over, heard screaming while I was riding fence." His gaze never left Thomas, but his words were for her. "Madam, you all right?" Thomas moved toward the rifle leaning against the wall. "I said get out." In one fluid motion, Levi drew his pistol. "I wouldn't." Cassandra could hardly breathe. Everything was happening too fast, the room spinning from the blow to her head, her body aching from Thomas's attack and from the loss she still couldn't fully comprehend. The baby. Her baby was gone, miss. Levi's voice was gentler now, though his gun remained steady. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, unsure what else to do. Thomas would kill her for certain if she left with this stranger, but he might kill her tonight anyway, the way his rage was building. "You take one step toward that door," Thomas threatened, "and I'll hunt you both down like dogs." Levi's expression didn't change. "Sir, I'd recommend you cool that temper. Sheriff Daniels is a friend of mine, and he takes a particularly dim view of men who beat their wives." He addressed Cassandra again. "Madam, if you want to leave, now's the time." Thomas lunged for the rifle. Levi's pistol cracked once and the bullet splintered the floorboard inches from Thomas's reaching hand. "Next one won't miss," Levi said. Cassandra made her choice in that moment. With trembling legs, she managed to stand, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. "I'll go," she whispered. Thomas's face darkened with fury. "You leave with him, you're dead to me, Cassandra." For the first time since he'd begun hitting her, Cassandra looked her husband directly in the eyes. "I've been dead to you for a long time, Thomas." She managed to walk to the door, though her legs threatened to give out with each step. Levi backed out after her, his pistol still trained on Thomas until they were both outside. "My horse is just yonder," Levi said, nodding toward a sturdy bay gelding tied to the hitching post. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Cassandra said, though she wasn't sure. She'd ridden before her marriage, but Thomas had sold her mare last year, saying they needed the money. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of hatred. "You'll regret this." Levi helped Cassandra mount, then swung up behind her. "Hold on," he murmured, and she felt his arm secure around her waist as the horse moved into a trot, then a canter, putting distance between them and the cabin that had been her prison for 3 years. They rode in silence for nearly a mile before Cassandra's composure finally broke. The tears came in great, heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. Levi said nothing, simply slowed the horse to a walk and kept his arm steady around her. "I lost the baby," she finally managed between sobs. I didn't do anything wrong. The doctor said sometimes it just happens." Levi's voice was quiet but firm. "That loss wasn't your fault at all, madam." 5 simple words, but they broke something loose inside her chest. No one had said that to her, not the doctor, not the pastor's wife who'd helped clean her up afterward. Certainly not Thomas, who'd looked at her as though she'd deliberately destroyed his legacy. "Where are we going?" she asked when she could finally speak again. "Crescent Ranch," Levi replied. "The owner, Mrs. Hargrove, is a good woman. She'll give you shelter while you decide what comes next." Cassandra tensed. "I can't impose, you won't be imposing. Mrs. Hargrove has a soft spot for those in need." There was something in his tone that made Cassandra wonder if he spoke from personal experience. They crested a small rise, and in the distance, Cassandra could make out the buildings of a large ranch. Even in the fading light, she could see it was prosperous, far more so than the struggling homestead Thomas had scraped together. "Thomas will come looking for me," she said, voicing her deepest fear. Levi's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Let him try." The main house of Crescent Ranch was a 2-story affair with a wide porch and warm light spilling from the windows. As they approached, a woman stepped out onto the porch, tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of someone who commanded respect without demanding it. "Levi," she called as they rode into the yard. "You're late for supper and you've brought company." Levi dismounted first, then reached up to help Cassandra down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and she had to lean against the horse to steady herself. "Mrs. Hargrove," Levi said, his tone respectful. "This is Mrs. Adams from the homestead east of the creek. She needs sanctuary." The older woman took one look at Cassandra's bruised face and split lip, and her expression hardened. "Bring her inside, Levi, quickly." What followed was a blur for Cassandra, being ushered into a warm kitchen, a cup of hot tea pressed into her hands, a young Mexican woman gently cleaning the cuts on her face, while Mrs. Hargrove and Levi spoke in low tones in the next room. The smell of beef stew and fresh bread made her stomach clench painfully. When had she last eaten? Before the doctor left, maybe. Mrs. Hargrove returned, her face softened with compassion. "My dear, you're safe here. Levi has told me something of your situation. I want you to know you may stay as long as you need." Cassandra's hands trembled around the teacup. "My husband will not set foot on Crescent land," Mrs. Hargrove said firmly. "Now, Elena has prepared a room for you upstairs. After you've eaten something, you should rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to talk more." That night, clean and bandaged, lying in a soft bed in a room with a lock on the door, Cassandra wept again for her baby, for the girl she'd once been, for the woman she'd become. And somewhere in the midst of those tears, exhaustion claimed her, and she slept more deeply than she had in years. Morning came with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the distant sounds of a working ranch. Cassandra's body ached, but the pounding in her head had subsided. She found clean clothes laid out for her, a simple dress that must have belonged to Mrs. Hargrove or one of the household staff, though it was finer than anything Cassandra had worn since her wedding day. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Hargrove at a large oak table, account books spread before her. The older woman looked up and smiled. "Good morning, you must be hungry. Elena will fix you some breakfast." "I couldn't impose further," Cassandra began, but Mrs. Hargrove waved away her protest. "Nonsense. You need to recover your strength." She studied Cassandra carefully. "Levi told me about the baby. I'm deeply sorry for your loss." Cassandra's throat tightened. "Thank you." "I lost 2 of my own before they were born," Mrs. Hargrove continued, surprising Cassandra with her frankness. My late husband, God rest him, said it was the Lord's will, and perhaps it was. But it nearly broke me each time. How did you? Go on, Cassandra asked. Mrs. Hargrove's smile was gentle. One day at a time, my dear, and by surrounding myself with good people who valued me for more than my ability to bear children. She gestured toward a chair. Sit. We'll talk after you've eaten. Alina brought a plate laden with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. Cassandra hadn't realized how famished she was until the food was before her. Thomas had often complained about her appetite, saying she ate too much for a woman of her size. She pushed the thought away and focused on the simple pleasure of a meal eaten without criticism. After breakfast, Mrs. Hargrove showed her around the main house, a spacious dwelling with 6 bedrooms, a study, a formal parlor, and the large kitchen where they'd first entered. Through the windows, Cassandra could see ranch hands moving about their duties, cattle grazing in distant pastures and horses in the corral. My husband built this place 30 years ago, Mrs. Hargrove explained. When he passed 5 years back, folks thought I'd sell and move to town. But this is my home. There was quiet pride in her voice. I run it with the help of my foreman, Mr. Weston, and about 15 hands depending on the season. It's beautiful, Cassandra said sincerely. It's also a working ranch and every hand earns their keep, Mrs. Hargrove said. Which brings me to a proposition. I need help with the household accounts and correspondence. My eyes aren't what they were, and Alina is a treasure with cooking and cleaning but has no head for numbers. You look to be an educated woman. Cassandra nodded slowly. My father was the schoolmaster in Austin. He taught me arithmetic and proper penmanship. Then I'm offering you employment, Mrs. Adams. Room, board, and a fair wage in exchange for your assistance with the books and letters. It would give you time to heal and consider your options. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Cassandra could only stare. Why would you do this for a stranger? Mrs. Hargrove's expression grew serious. Because 20 years ago I was that stranger, running from a man who thought his wedding vows gave him the right to break my spirit along with my bones. Someone helped me then. I'm simply passing that kindness forward. Tears pricked Cassandra's eyes. I accept gratefully. Good, Mrs. Hargrove nodded decisively. We'll start tomorrow. Today you rest. The doctor will be by this afternoon to check your injuries. Mrs. Hargrove, Cassandra hesitated. I'd like to thank Mr. Weston as well. Is he around? Levy's out with the cattle today. He'll be back for supper. The older woman gave her an appraising look. He's a good man, Mrs. Adams. One of the best I've known, despite or perhaps because of his past. Before Cassandra could ask what she meant, Mrs. Hargrove was called away by one of the ranch hands, leaving Cassandra to wonder about the quiet cowboy who had intervened in her darkest moment. True to Mrs. Hargrove's word, the doctor arrived mid-afternoon, a gruff but gentle man named Parker who examined Cassandra's injuries with clinical efficiency. Ribs are bruised, not broken, he pronounced. Head wound is superficial, split lip will heal. You're lucky, Mrs. Adams. Lucky wasn't the word Cassandra would have chosen, but she nodded anyway. And the other matter? Dr. Parker asked delicately. Any continued bleeding or pain? No, Cassandra said, her hand instinctively going to her abdomen. That seems to have ended, the doctor nodded. Good. Rest, decent food, and time will do the rest. He packed up his bag. I knew Thomas Adams's father, mean drunk with a heavy hand. Seems the son follows the father's path. Cassandra looked away, shame burning her cheeks. Dr. Parker's hand on her shoulder was unexpectedly gentle. The sins of the father need not be visited upon the child, Mrs. Adams. Remember that. When he'd gone, Cassandra found herself drawn to the porch, where a rocking chair offered a view of the ranch yard. The afternoon sun was warm, and despite everything, she felt a sense of peace washing over her. Not happiness that was too much to hope for yet, but the absence of immediate fear was a blessing in itself. She must have dozed off, for the next thing she knew, the sun was lower in the sky and hoofbeats were approaching. Levi Weston rode into the yard, his tall frame easy in the saddle, hat pulled low against the sun. He dismounted with the fluid grace she remembered from the previous day, handed the reins to a stable boy, and then looked up, catching sight of her on the porch. For a moment, they simply regarded each other across the distance. Then Levi nodded and approached the porch steps, removing his hat as he climbed. "Mrs. Adams," he said, "you're looking better today." "Thanks to you," she replied. "I never properly thanked you for what you did." Levi shook his head. "No thanks needed. Any decent man would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," Cassandra said softly. "Most men would have ridden on, saying it wasn't their business." He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Mrs. Hargrove said you'll be staying on, helping with the books." "Yes, she's been incredibly kind." Levi's expression softened slightly. "She's a good judge of character. If she's offered you a place here, she sees something worth investing in." The simple words touched Cassandra deeply. "I hope to prove her right." "You will." He seemed about to say more, but instead put his hat back on. "Excuse me, Mrs. Adams, I need to clean up before supper." As he walked away, Cassandra found herself watching his retreating figure with curiosity. There was something about Levi Weston, a quiet strength, a dignity that spoke of hardships overcome. And something else, something in his eyes when he looked at her that wasn't pity exactly, but a deeper understanding. Supper at Crescent Ranch was a surprisingly informal affair. Mrs. Hargrove sat at the head of the long oak table, with Levi at her right hand. Elena served and then joined them, along with Diego, the Mexican ranch hand who served as Levi's right-hand man. The food was simple but plentiful: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from the kitchen garden. Cassandra ate quietly, listening to the talk of ranch business, cattle prices, a fence that needed mending, plans for the upcoming spring roundup. It was all so normal, so different from the tense, silent meals with Thomas, where one wrong word could spark his temper. "Mrs. Adams will be taking over the accounts and correspondence," Mrs. Hargrove announced during a lull in the conversation. "Levi, you'll need to coordinate with her on the purchasing ledgers." Levi nodded. "Yes, madam, happy to." "I'll try not to take too much of your time, Mr. Weston," Cassandra said. "I know you have more important duties." "Nothing's more important than keeping the books straight," Levi replied seriously, though there was a glint in his eye that might have been humor. "A ranch runs on numbers as much as cattle and horses." After dinner, Mrs. Hargrove invited everyone to the parlor, where Diego surprised Cassandra by taking out a guitar and playing. His fingers moved nimbly over the strings, coaxing out melodies that were by turns melancholy and joyful. "Diego's father was a musician in Mexico City," Mrs. Hargrove explained. "He taught his son well." Elena sang along to some of the songs, her clear voice filling the room. Even Levi seemed more relaxed, leaning back in his chair, his usual watchfulness softened by the music and the company. It was the most pleasant evening Cassandra had experienced in years. When she finally excused herself to bed, her heart felt lighter despite the day's emotional strain. The next morning, Mrs. Hargrove showed Cassandra the study where she kept the ranch accounts. The ledgers were neat but clearly in need of updating. "I've fallen behind," Mrs. Hargrove admitted. "My eyes strain with the small print these days." Cassandra examined the books with growing interest. Her father had insisted she learn basic bookkeeping, saying it was a skill any intelligent person should possess. Thomas had scoffed at her knowledge, preferring to keep his own haphazard records, but here, it seemed, her abilities would be valued. "I can organize these," she said with growing confidence. "I'll need you to explain some of the ranch-specific terminology, but the principles are clear enough." Mrs. Hargrove smiled approvingly. "I knew you were the right person for this task." "I'll have Levi come by later to go over the cattle accounts with you." True to her word, Levi appeared at the study door mid-morning, knocking politely before entering. "Mrs. Hargrove said you wanted to see the cattle ledgers," he said, setting a worn leather journal on the desk. "Yes, thank you." Cassandra opened it, noting the precise handwriting. "Your records are very thorough, Mr. Weston. Call me Levi," he said. "Everyone here does. And keeping good records was one of the first things Mrs. Hargrove insisted on when she hired me. Said a man who can't account for every head of cattle isn't fit to be foreman." Cassandra smiled slightly. "That sounds like her." Levi pulled up a chair beside her, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "Let me show you how we track the herds and sales." For the next hour, he explained the ranch's system, how they marked cattle, tracked births and deaths, recorded sales and purchases. His manner was patient and matter-of-fact, with none of the condescension Thomas had always shown when explaining men's business to her. "You have a good head for this," Levi commented when she quickly grasped a complicated calculation for determining profit margins. "My father believed education was important for everyone, daughters included," Cassandra replied. Thomas disagreed. She hadn't meant to mention her husband, and the name fell awkwardly between them. Levi's expression darkened briefly. "Some men fear what they don't understand. And there's nothing more threatening to a small man than a woman with a mind of her own." The assessment of Thomas was so accurate that Cassandra was momentarily speechless. Levi seemed to realize he'd spoken too freely and stood. "I should get back to work. The men are moving cattle to the north pasture today." He hesitated. "If you have any questions about the ledgers, I'm happy to help, Mrs. Adams." "Cassandra," she said impulsively, "if I'm to call you Levi, you should use my given name." A slight smile touched his lips. "Cassandra, then." After he'd gone, Cassandra found herself staring at the doorway, wondering about the enigmatic foreman. There was a depth to him that intrigued her, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his obvious strength and capability. The days settled into a rhythm. Mornings were spent in the study with the account books. Afternoons often found Cassandra helping Alina in the kitchen or garden, and evenings were for conversation in the parlor or on the porch. Her bruises faded, and the constant knot of tension in her stomach began to ease. She wrote to her sister in Austin, letting her know she was safe but withholding details that might worry her. A week passed, then two. Cassandra found herself watching for Levi each day, looking forward to their brief conversations about ranch business. He was unfailingly polite, even kind, but maintained a certain distance that she couldn't help but notice. "He's careful with his heart," Mrs. Hargrove remarked one evening when she caught Cassandra watching Levi ride out to check the night herd. "I'm not," Cassandra began, but Mrs. Hargrove's knowing look stopped her denial. "Levi came to Crescent 5 years ago, not long after my Arthur passed," the older woman continued. "He was hired on as a regular hand but proved himself quickly. He'd worked cattle before, that was clear, but there was something in his past that haunted him. Still does, I suspect." Cassandra's curiosity was piqued. "Did he ever speak of it?" "Not directly. But a woman my age recognizes grief when she sees it. And Levi carries his like a man who's learned to live with it but never quite put it down." Mrs. Hargrove patted Cassandra's hand. "Give him time, my dear, and yourself as well. Wounds of the heart heal slowly." That night, unable to sleep, Cassandra ventured onto the porch, drawn by the clear night sky and the chorus of crickets and night birds. To her surprise, Levi was there, seated on the steps, whittling a small piece of wood. "I'm sorry," she said, starting to retreat. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not," he said, setting aside his knife and wood. "Couldn't sleep?" "No." She hesitated, then joined him on the steps, maintaining a respectable distance. "Sometimes the quiet is too quiet, if that makes sense. In town, there were always noises, neighbors, animals, the saloon down the street." Levi nodded. "I know what you mean. Took me a while to get used to the ranch nights after years of sleeping in bunkhouses with 20 snoring cowboys." Cassandra smiled at the image. "Where were you before Crescent?" "All over," he said vaguely. "Texas mostly, some time in Kansas and Colorado." "A true cowboy," she observed. Something like pain flashed across his face. "Not always. I had a different life once." Cassandra sensed she was treading on sensitive ground but couldn't help asking, "What changed?" Levi was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was low and distant, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside him. I had a wife, Sarah, and a little boy, James. We had a small farm near Austin. He stared out into the darkness. There was a fever that swept through. Took them both within days of each other. Oh, Levi, Cassandra breathed. I'm so sorry. He shook his head slightly. It was 8 years ago now. After they were gone, I couldn't stay there. Sold the farm, bought a horse, and just rode, worked cattle drives, ranch jobs, whatever kept me moving. Until Crescent, Cassandra said softly. Until Crescent, he agreed. Mrs. Hargrove Victoria, she has a way of seeing through a man's defenses, saw I was running and told me plainly that running doesn't heal anything. Said I could stay as long as I needed, do honest work, and maybe find some peace. A faint smile touched his lips. She was right, as usual. Cassandra thought about her own situation, how different it was from Levi's grief, and yet how similar in the way it had derailed the life she'd expected to have. Do you think there's a point where you stop feeling like your life was stolen from you? Levi considered her question seriously. I don't know that you ever stop feeling the loss. But there comes a day when you realize you're still here, still breathing, and maybe that means there's more life to be lived. He looked at her directly. What Thomas did to you, that was wrong, but it doesn't define who you are or what your future holds. His words struck a chord deep within her. I'm trying to believe that. It takes time, Levi said, and having people around who see you for who you really are, not just what happened to you. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds washing over them. When Cassandra finally stood to go back inside, Levi rose as well. Thank you for sharing your story, she said. I know it couldn't have been easy. Strangely, it was easier than I expected, he replied. Good night, Cassandra. Good night, Levi. As April turned to May, Cassandra's life at Crescent Ranch settled into a comfortable routine. The accounts were now fully updated and organized, and Mrs. Hargrove expressed delight at how efficiently Cassandra handled the ranch business. I haven't had the books in such good order since Arthur was alive, she declared. Cassandra found satisfaction in the work, in being useful and appreciated. She'd begun taking short rides on one of the gentler ranch horses, rediscovering the joy of freedom that had been denied her during her marriage. Sometimes Levi rode with her, pointing out landmarks and teaching her about the ranch operations. Their friendship had deepened since that night on the porch. Levi was still reserved by nature, but with Cassandra, he seemed to let his guard down more often. They shared stories of their childhoods, discovered mutual interests in books and music, and occasionally disagreed good-naturedly about politics or the best way to break a horse. Cassandra found herself looking forward to these times together with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. It was too soon, she told herself. Her marriage wasn't even legally ended. And yet, the way her heart quickened when Levi smiled at her couldn't be denied. One evening in late May, as they returned from a ride along the creek that marked the eastern boundary of Crescent Land, Levi suddenly reined in his horse, his expression tense. What is it? Cassandra asked, pulling her mare to a stop beside him. Smoke, Levi said, pointing toward where her old homestead with Thomas lay. And too much of it to be a cooking fire. They urged their horses forward, cresting the small rise that separated Crescent Land from the Adams homestead. What they saw made Cassandra gasp. The cabin was engulfed in flames, orange tongues licking up toward the darkening sky. A figure Thomas staggered around the yard, clearly drunk, waving what looked like a bottle. Stay here, Levi ordered, but Cassandra was already urging her horse forward. Thomas, she called as they approached. What have you done? Her husband turned, his face contorted with rage and alcohol. There she is, the faithless whore herself, he staggered toward them. Come to see what you caused. Levi positioned his horse between Cassandra and Thomas. Back off, Adams, you're drunk. And you're dead, Cowboy, Thomas snarled, fumbling for the pistol at his belt. Levi moved faster than Cassandra would have believed possible, dismounting and tackling Thomas before he could draw. The two men crashed to the ground, grappling in the dirt. Thomas was wild with rage and liquor, but Levi was stronger and more controlled. In seconds, he had Thomas pinned, the drunk man's own pistol pressed against his temple. "Give me one reason," Levi growled. "Levi, no," Cassandra cried, dismounting and rushing to them. "He's not worth it." Levi's face was a mask of cold fury unlike anything Cassandra had seen from him before. For a terrible moment, she feared he would pull the trigger. Then, with visible effort, he controlled himself, instead bringing the pistol down hard on Thomas's temple, knocking him unconscious. "We need to get the sheriff," Levi said, his voice tight. "The cabin," Cassandra began, looking at the burning building. "Nothing to be done for it now," Levi said. "It's too far gone." As they watched, the roof collapsed inward, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Cassandra felt a strange emptiness watching her marital home burn. There was nothing in that cabin she wanted to salvage, no happy memories, no treasured possessions. "He did this because of me," she said quietly. Levi turned to her, his expression softening. "No. He did this because he's a coward and a bully who couldn't face his own failings. This isn't your fault, Cassandra." Diego and two other ranch hands arrived, having seen the smoke from Crescent. Levi ordered them to tie up Thomas and take him to the sheriff in Trinity, then turned back to Cassandra. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, though she was trembling. I keep thinking about how this could have happened while I was still there. He was so angry when you took me away." She looked at the smoldering ruins. "Everything I owned was in there." "Things can be replaced," Levi said. "You can't." They rode back to Crescent Ranch in silence, the shock of the evening's events settling heavily on Cassandra. Mrs. Hargrove was waiting on the porch, alerted by the other hands of the fire. "My dear girl," she said, embracing Cassandra. "What a terrible thing." "Thomas is being taken to Sheriff Daniels," Levi reported. "Arson, attempted assault, probably more once the sheriff questions him." Mrs. Hargrove's expression was grim. "It's time to consider a divorce, Cassandra. No woman should remain tied to a man like that. Divorce." The word hung in the air, loaded with social stigma and practical difficulties. In Texas, divorce was legal but rare and complicated, especially for a woman with no property or powerful family connections. "I wouldn't know where to begin," Cassandra admitted. "I would," Mrs. Hargrove said firmly. "My late husband was a lawyer before he turned to ranching. I still have friends in the legal profession. We'll speak to Judge Wilson tomorrow." That night, despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Cassandra. She kept seeing Thomas's hate-filled face, the burning cabin, Levi with the gun pressed to Thomas's head. What might have happened if she hadn't been there? Would Levi have killed Thomas to protect her? The thought both terrified and strangely moved her. No one had ever been willing to go to such lengths for her before. A soft knock at her door startled her from these thoughts. "Cassandra," Levi's voice, low and concerned. "Are you awake?" She rose and opened the door a crack. Levi stood in the hallway, still fully dressed, his face shadowed with worry. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "Wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm managing," she answered truthfully. "What will happen to Thomas?" "Sheriff Daniels will hold him for now. With witnesses to the arson and his threats, he'll likely face jail time." Levi hesitated. "I'm sorry about what happened back there. I nearly lost control." "You didn't," Cassandra said. "That's what matters." His eyes met hers, dark and troubled. "When I saw him reaching for that gun, all I could think was that he might hurt you again. I couldn't let that happen." The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. "Levi, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "You're still married, still healing. But I need you to know that you've become important to me, Cassandra, more than I expected, more than might be wise." Her heart pounded in her chest. "You've become important to me too." They stood for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Levi stepped back, ever the gentleman. "Try to rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be a difficult day." He was right. The next morning brought Sheriff Daniels to Crescent Ranch, a gruff older man with a no-nonsense manner. He questioned Cassandra about her marriage, Thomas's abuse, and the events of the previous night, taking careful notes in a worn leather book. "Mrs. Adams, I've known Thomas since he was a boy," the sheriff said when they'd finished. "Always had a mean streak even then. His pa was the same way." He shook his head. "What he did to you was criminal, should have been stopped long before now." "Will he go to prison?" Cassandra asked. "For the arson, yes, and I've added charges for the assault on you both last night and the day Mr. Weston brought you here." The sheriff's expression was somber. "But Texas law being what it is, the courts tend to see a husband's treatment of his wife as a private matter unless it results in severe injury or death." Cassandra nodded, unsurprised but disappointed. "That said," the sheriff continued, "Judge Wilson is a fair man. With Mr. Weston's testimony and the evidence of Thomas's violent nature, I believe you have grounds for divorce." "And if Thomas contests it?" Cassandra asked, voicing her deepest fear. "From jail, he won't have much say, and frankly, Mrs. Adams, a man who burns down his own home in a drunken rage doesn't tend to inspire much sympathy from a judge." Sheriff Daniels left shortly after, promising to keep them informed of developments. True to her word, Mrs. Hargrove arranged for Cassandra to meet with Judge Wilson that afternoon in Trinity. The judge was a tall, austere man with penetrating blue eyes and a reputation for fairness. He listened to Cassandra's account of her marriage without interruption, then asked several pointed questions about Thomas's treatment of her and the loss of their child. "Mrs. Adams, I've seen too many women in your situation," he said finally. "The law provides for divorce on grounds of cruelty, and your case clearly meets that standard. I'll have the papers drawn up immediately." He peered at her over his spectacles. "You understand that divorce carries a certain stigma?" "Yes, Your Honor," Cassandra replied steadily. "But staying married to Thomas would cost me my life one way or another." The judge nodded. "Well said. The papers will be served to your husband in jail. Given the circumstances, I expect the divorce to be finalized within 2 months." 2 months. After 3 years of marriage, 2 months seemed both an eternity and the blink of an eye. Cassandra left the judge's office with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She was taking steps toward freedom, but the path ahead was uncertain. Levi was waiting for her outside, having accompanied her and Mrs. Hargrove to town. "How did it go?" he asked anxiously. "Judge Wilson is filing the divorce papers today," she told him. "He says it should be final in about 2 months." Relief washed over Levi's face. "That's good news." "Yes," Cassandra agreed, though her voice lacked conviction. "But," Levi prompted gently. She sighed. "But I'm 23 years old, soon to be divorced, with no family nearby, no home, no possessions, and a reputation that's likely in tatters. Not exactly the future I imagined for myself." Mrs. Hargrove, who had been speaking to an acquaintance nearby, rejoined them. "My dear, the future is rarely what we imagine, for better or worse. What matters is how we face it. And you're not alone," Levi added quietly. "You have us." The simple statement warmed Cassandra's heart. Yes, she had them, this unlikely family she'd found in the aftermath of tragedy. Perhaps that was enough for now. June brought scorching heat to Trinity, Texas. The ranch work continued despite the temperatures, with cattle being moved to higher pastures where grass remained green and water was more plentiful. Cassandra's days were filled with accounts, correspondence, and increasingly, helping Mrs. Hargrove manage the household. The older woman had begun to rely on Cassandra more and more, treating her almost like a daughter. Sheriff Daniels rode out to inform them that Thomas had been sentenced to a year in jail for arson and assault. The news should have brought Cassandra relief, but instead, she felt strangely hollow. It was as if Thomas had taken something from her that no jail sentence could restore: a certain innocence, perhaps, or the belief that love was supposed to protect, not destroy. Levi found her that evening sitting by the creek that ran through Crescent property, tossing pebbles into the slow-moving water. Diego said you missed supper, he said, settling beside her on the grassy bank. Mrs. Hargrove was worried. I needed to think, Cassandra replied. Sheriff Daniels came by with news about Thomas. I heard, a year isn't enough, she shrugged. No, but it's something, and the divorce should be final by then. She glanced at him. It's strange, I thought I'd feel, I don't know, vindicated. Instead, I just feel tired. Levi was silent for a moment, watching the water. After Sarah and James died, I was angry for a long time. Angry at God, at the doctor who couldn't save them, at myself for not somehow preventing it. Took me years to realize that anger was just covering up the hurt. His voice softened. Maybe what you're feeling now is just your heart beginning to heal. Maybe, Cassandra said, touched by his insight. How did you do it? Move forward after losing everything, one day at a time, Levi said, echoing Mrs. Hargrove's words from months ago. And I didn't move forward so much as sideways for a long while. It wasn't until Crescent that I started to feel like I might have a future worth living for. The way he looked at her made Cassandra's heart skip. And now, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Now I'm certain of it, Levi said. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he reached for her hand. His calloused palm was warm against hers, his grip gentle but secure. I know the timing isn't right. You're still married in the eyes of the law, still healing. But when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want you to know that I'll be here. Cassandra looked down at their joined hands, then up at Levi's face, earnest, kind, and so different from Thomas's that it almost hurt to make the comparison. I don't know what I feel anymore, she admitted. Everything got so twisted with Thomas that I'm not sure I trust myself. Then trust time, Levi said simply. We have plenty of it. As July turned to August, the heat became even more oppressive, bringing with it the threat of drought. The creek that had flowed freely in spring was now reduced to a trickle, and the ranch hands worked tirelessly to ensure the cattle had access to the remaining water sources. Cassandra's divorce became final on a sweltering Tuesday, the official notice arriving by post in a plain envelope. She read it alone in the study, the legal language formally severing her ties to Thomas Adams. When she'd finished, she sat for a long time, the paper in her hands, uncertain whether to cry or celebrate. Mrs. Hargrove found her there. It's done then, Cassandra nodded. I'm no longer Mrs. Adams. The older woman squeezed her shoulder. Then it's time to decide who you are now, my dear. That evening, a small celebration was held in the ranch house parlor. Mrs. Hargrove produced a bottle of fine French champagne that had been saved for a special occasion, and toasts were made to new beginnings. Even Diego and Alina joined in, their usual reserve melting in the warmth of the gathering. Levi remained somewhat apart, watching Cassandra with a quiet intensity that made her skin tingle whenever their eyes met. Later, when the others had retired, he found her on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled Texas sky. Congratulations, he said, offering her a small wooden box. I wanted to give you this privately. Surprised, Cassandra opened it to find a delicate silver pendant on a chain, a crescent moon with a small star nestled in its curve. Levi, it's beautiful, she breathed, but I can't accept something so fine. Please, he said. I had it made in town. The crescent for the ranch that brought us together and the star. Well, I've always thought of you that way, bright even in the darkest night. Tears pricked Cassandra's eyes. With trembling fingers, she lifted the necklace from the box. Will you help me put it on? Levi moved behind her, taking the chain from her hands. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp, and Cassandra couldn't suppress a shiver at his touch. Thank you, she said, turning to face him. Not just for this, but for everything. For saving me that day, for showing me that not all men are like Thomas, for seeing me. Cassandra. Her name on his lips was like a prayer. I've been trying to keep my distance to give you the time you needed. But now that you're free, I find myself hoping. She silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. I'm hoping too, Levi. I'm still healing, still finding my way back to myself. But I know that whatever future I build, I want you in it. Levi took her hand from his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, with exquisite gentleness, he drew her into his arms and kissed her a kiss so tender, so full of promise that it brought fresh tears to Cassandra's eyes. When they parted, Levi rested his forehead against hers. "We'll take it slow," he promised, "day by day." Cassandra nodded, her heart too full for words. In this moment, with the Texas stars overhead and Levi's arms around her, the future no longer seemed a frightening unknown but a path they might walk together. The fall cattle drive to Fort Worth was Crescent Ranch's most significant operation of the year. For 2 weeks, Levi and most of the hands were away, moving over 300 head of cattle to market. Cassandra found herself missing him with an intensity that surprised her, counting the days until his return. In his absence, she threw herself into ranch work with renewed vigor. Mrs. Hargrove had been teaching her more about the business side of cattle ranching, and Cassandra proved an apt pupil. She even began riding out with Diego to check the remaining herds, learning the practical aspects of ranch management. "You have a natural eye for good stock," Diego commented one afternoon as they inspected a group of yearling heifers. "Mrs. Hargrove says the same." Cassandra smiled at the compliment. "I never imagined myself as a rancher's wife," she stopped abruptly, flushing at the implication of her words. Diego's dark eyes twinkled with amusement. "Senor Weston is a good man, the best I have known, and he looks at you like a man dying of thirst looks at water." "Is it that obvious?" Cassandra asked, embarrassed but pleased. "To everyone but the two of you, it seems," Diego replied with a shrug. "Life is too short for hesitation, Senora. My people have a saying, 'Love offered is already half returned.'" Cassandra pondered his words as they rode back to the ranch. Her feelings for Levi had grown steadily over the months, transforming from gratitude to friendship to something much deeper. Yet she'd been cautious, fearful of moving too quickly after the disaster of her marriage. But perhaps Diego was right. Life was too short for hesitation, especially when the heart was certain. The cattle drive party returned on a crisp October evening, tired but successful. Mrs. Hargrove had arranged a welcome home feast, and the ranch house buzzed with activity as Alina and Cassandra prepared the special meal. When Levi walked through the door, dusty and trail-worn but smiling, Cassandra's heart leaped. She wanted to rush to him but held back, conscious of the others around them. Their relationship, while no secret, had remained discreet out of respect for her recent divorce, but Levi had no such reservations. He crossed the room in long strides and, to Cassandra's surprise and delight, took her in his arms and kissed her firmly, right there in front of Mrs. Hargrove, Alina, Diego, and half a dozen ranch hands. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Mrs. Hargrove was smiling indulgently. "Well, it's about time," she declared. "Now let's eat before the food gets cold." Later that night, after the celebration had wound down, Levi and Cassandra walked in the moonlight, her hand tucked securely in his. "I missed you," he said simply. "Every day, every mile." "I missed you too," she replied. "The ranch isn't the same without you." Levi stopped walking and turned to face her. In the silver moonlight, his expression was solemn, but his eyes were bright with emotion. "Cassandra, these past months have been the happiest I've known since I lost Sarah and James. I never thought I'd feel this way again, never thought I'd want to." He took both her hands in his. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first night on the porch when you shared your pain with me, and I saw the strength in you that refused to be broken." Tears filled Cassandra's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too, Levi. You showed me what love is supposed to be: kind, supportive, patient. You gave me back myself when I thought Thomas had destroyed everything worthwhile in me." Levi brought her hands to his lips, kissing each one tenderly. "I want to build a life with you, Cassandra. Not just here at Crescent, though Mrs. Hargrove has made it clear we're both welcome as long as we want to stay. But somewhere that's ours, if that's what you want. A home. A family, perhaps, when you're ready." The mention of family brought a pang to Cassandra's heart, the memory of the child she'd lost, the fear that perhaps she couldn't carry a baby to term. Levi, about children. The doctor wasn't certain I could have another after what happened. Then we'll face that together, Levi said firmly. There are many ways to build a family. But know this, I want you, Cassandra, you, not what you can or can't give me. If it's just the two of us for the rest of our days, that would be enough, more than enough. His words washed away the last of her doubts. Ask me, she whispered. Levi's smile was as bright as the stars overhead. He went down on one knee, still holding her hands. Cassandra, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my heart's home for as long as we both shall live? Yes, she said, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. Yes, I will. He stood and gathered her into his arms, his kiss deeper now, filled with promise and passion. When they finally parted, both were breathless and laughing. Mrs. Hargrove will be insufferably pleased with herself, Cassandra remarked. She's been pushing for this since June, Levi admitted. Said we were moving at a snail's pace and life was too short for such foolishness. Cassandra laughed. Diego told me something similar. It seems everyone knew what was happening before we did. Not before, Levi corrected, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I knew I was falling in love with you that day by the creek when you said Thomas's loss wasn't your fault. I just didn't think it was fair to tell you then. They were married on Christmas Day, 1877, in the parlor of Crescent Ranch. Mrs. Hargrove had insisted on hosting the ceremony, saying they were family in all but name already. Judge Wilson performed the service, and the ranch hands and townspeople who had come to know and respect Cassandra filled the house with warmth and good wishes. Cassandra wore a gown of pale blue silk that Mrs. Hargrove had ordered specially from Dallas, with the crescent and star pendant Levi had given her nestled at her throat. Levi, in a new black suit, looked so handsome that Cassandra's breath caught when he turned to watch her enter the room on Mrs. Hargrove's arm. Who gives this woman to be married? Judge Wilson asked. I do, Mrs. Hargrove said firmly, as one who loves her as a daughter. The vows were simple but heartfelt. When Levi slipped the gold band onto Cassandra's finger, his hands were steady but his eyes shone with unshed tears. And when Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up nearly lifted the roof. At the reception that followed, Mrs. Hargrove pulled them aside, her expression uncommonly serious. I have a wedding gift for you both, she said. As you know, I'm not getting any younger, and this ranch is more work than I care to admit these days. She handed Levi an envelope. This is the deed to the north section of Crescent Land, 500 acres, including that rise with the stand of oak trees that Cassandra is so fond of. It's yours to build your home and your future on. Cassandra gasped. Victoria, we can't possibly accept. You can and you will, Mrs. Hargrove said firmly. Arthur and I never had children, and you two have become the family I never thought to have in my old age. The land is yours, with the understanding that you'll continue to help run Crescent until I'm ready to turn over the reins completely, which, I might add, won't be for some years yet. I'm not quite decrepit. Levi, speechless with emotion, embraced the older woman. Thank you, he said hoarsely. We'll make you proud. You already have, Mrs. Hargrove replied, patting his cheek. Now go dance with your bride. It's unseemly for the groom to spend so much time with an old woman at his own wedding. Spring came early to Texas in 1878. Levi and Cassandra had spent the winter months planning their home, and as soon as the weather permitted, construction began on the rise that Mrs. Hargrove had gifted them. Levi insisted on building much of it himself, with help from the ranch hands when they could be spared. Cassandra threw herself into creating a true home, selecting furnishings, planting a garden, making curtains and linens. By May, the house was complete enough to move in, though Levi continued to add finishing touches throughout the summer. It was a beautiful home, larger than Cassandra had expected, with big windows to catch the breeze, a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides, and sturdy construction that would withstand Texas weather for generations. Levi had built in thoughtful details that showed how well he knew her: a bookshelf in the parlor for the collection she was building, a study with a desk positioned to catch the morning light, a kitchen large enough for the big family gatherings she hoped to host. In June, exactly 1 year after her divorce had been finalized, Cassandra received word that Thomas had been released from jail. The news sent a chill through her, despite Levi's reassurances. "He won't come near you," Levi promised. "Sheriff Daniels said he's headed west to California. Apparently, he has a cousin there. I hope he finds whatever he's looking for," Cassandra said, surprising herself with the sincerity of the sentiment, "or at least that he finds peace." Levi regarded her with that look of quiet admiration that never failed to warm her heart. "You're a better person than he deserved, Cassandra Weston." She smiled at the name, her new name, the one she'd chosen rather than the one that had been forced upon her. "I'm exactly the person I was meant to be, thanks to you." As summer turned to fall, Cassandra began to suspect what the slight changes in her body might mean. She waited until she was certain, consulting discreetly with Dr. Parker before sharing the news with Levi. They were sitting on their porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, when she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat abdomen. "Levi," she said softly, "we're going to have a baby." His eyes widened, a mixture of joy and concern crossing his face. "Are you sure?" Dr. Parker said. "He was wrong," Cassandra said simply. "Or perhaps it was just the wrong time before, but now everything is right." Levi gathered her into his arms, his touch gentle as if she might break. "Are you afraid?" he asked, knowing her history, the loss that had nearly destroyed her. "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I'm hopeful. We're not Thomas and Cassandra Adams. We're Levi and Cassandra Weston, and our child will know only love, never fear." As her pregnancy progressed, Cassandra found herself surrounded by support. Mrs. Hargrove fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting she rest and eat well. Elena shared traditional Mexican remedies for morning sickness that proved surprisingly effective. Even the ranch hands treated her with a kind of reverent care, as if she were carrying something precious, which, of course, she was. Levi was attentive without being smothering, supportive without treating her as fragile. He took on more of her duties at the ranch, insisted on accompanying her to every doctor's appointment, and spent hours talking to her growing belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and promises of adventures to come. In April 1879, as the bluebonnets bloomed across the Texas hills, Cassandra went into labor. Dr. Parker was summoned, as was the midwife from Trinity. Levi paced outside the bedroom until Mrs. Hargrove threatened to have him tied to a chair if he didn't sit down. The labor was long and difficult. As the hours stretched on, Levi's fear grew. The memory of how he'd found Cassandra beaten and broken because of a miscarriage haunted him. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her as he'd lost Sarah? "She's strong, your wife," Mrs. Hargrove told him as they waited. "Stronger than she knows. Have faith in that strength." Finally, as dawn was breaking over the ranch, a new cry joined the chorus of morning birds, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the bedroom door opened and Dr. Parker emerged, tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Weston, you have a healthy son." Levi's legs nearly gave out beneath him. A son, and Cassandra, as if reading his mind, Dr. Parker clapped him on the shoulder. "Your wife did beautifully. She's tired but well, you can go in now." Nothing could have prepared Levi for the sight that greeted him: Cassandra, exhausted but radiant, propped up against pillows with a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he entered, her smile brighter than the Texas sunrise. "Levi," she whispered, "come meet your son." He approached the bed on unsteady legs, overwhelmed by the rush of emotion. The tiny face peeking out from the blankets was red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that, when they briefly opened, seemed to contain all the wisdom of the ages. "He's perfect," Levi breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Would you like to hold him?" Cassandra asked, with reverent care. Levi took his son into his arms, marveling at how something so small could feel so significant. What shall we call him? They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one, wanting to meet their child first. Cassandra watched Levi cradle their son, her heart so full she thought it might burst. What about James? She suggested softly. After your first son. Levi looked at her, his eyes swimming with tears. Cassandra, are you sure? I'm sure, she said. James Thomas Weston. Levi's eyebrows rose at the middle name. Thomas, Cassandra nodded. To remind us that even from the darkest moments, light can come, that what was meant to break me instead led me to you, to this, to everything that matters. Levi leaned forward and kissed her with infinite tenderness. James Thomas Weston it is then, a name with a story behind it, like all the best things in life. As the years passed, Crescent Ranch flourished, as did the Weston family. James was joined by a sister, Victoria Sarah, named for the two strong women who had shaped Levi and Cassandra's lives. Mrs. Hargrove lived to see both children grow into teenagers before passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82. As per her will, the remainder of Crescent Ranch passed to Levi and Cassandra, who continued its traditions of hard work, fair dealing, and helping those in need. Trinity, Texas grew into a proper town with a school where Cassandra occasionally taught lessons in literature and arithmetic. Her experience with Thomas, rather than defining her, became a source of empathy that allowed her to help other women in similar situations. She and Levi established a small fund to assist women and children escaping abusive situations, providing temporary shelter at the ranch and help finding work and housing. Thomas Adams never returned to Trinity. They heard, years later, that he had died in a bar fight in San Francisco, alone and still angry at the world. When the news reached her, Cassandra lit a candle in the window and said a simple prayer for the troubled soul of the man she had once thought she loved. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Levi took Cassandra riding to the creek where they had first begun to acknowledge their feelings for each other. The water flowed freely that spring day, much as it had when he'd found her tossing pebbles into it, trying to make sense of her life. "Do you ever wonder," Levi asked as they sat beneath the oak tree that had witnessed so many moments of their life together, "what would have happened if I hadn't ridden by your cabin that day?" Cassandra considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I remember something my father used to say. Life's path is rarely straight, but it leads where it's meant to go." She took his hand, the hand that had helped her up when she'd fallen, built their home, cradled their children, and held hers through joy and sorrow. "I think we were always meant to find each other, Levi. Maybe not that day or that way, but somehow." Levi brought her hand to his lips. "That day, when I told you the loss wasn't your fault, I never imagined I was speaking to the woman who would become my heart's home. And I never imagined the cowboy who saved me would save me in so many ways, over and over again, day after day," Cassandra replied, leaning against his shoulder. They sat in companionable silence, watching the creek flow, listening to the birdsong in the trees, feeling the Texas sun warm on their faces. Behind them, on the rise, their home stood strong and welcoming, a testament to the life they had built from the broken pieces of their past. And in that moment, as in so many before and so many yet to come, they were exactly where they were meant to be together, whole, and completely at home in the love they had fought for and won.